was thinking that perhaps I was getting too worked up over the whole cliched fantasy thing on fictionpress.net. Perhaps most fantasy is actually like that and meant to be read by people who like the plotline. Amanda Rose, a seemingly normal 15-year-old, wakes up one morning and finds out that she's really the princess of the world of Nadelia, and her name is Mytharilia, and she has to fight the dark enchantress Heldiga. Perhaps simply because it's been a long time since I've read a book where someone from Earth goes to another world, I tend to avoid them on purpose, I'm missing fantasy's point. And then I read On Fairy Stories this morning and realized that no, I don't think I am. Because even if that's what fantasy is, that isn't what it has to be, or even necessarily what it should be. Fantasy can say things about the primary world, as Tolkien calls it, without preaching. That can be safely left up to pamphlets and fables. It can make beautiful things and present them as ends in themselves, without having to use them for the sake of a tired story. And it can, as Tolkien says, gratify primordial human desires, without lapsing into the shallow satisfaction of someone's personal longing to be the center of a world. With such beauty, such breadth and depth and height, I can't understand why someone would want to waste her time writing such a story and passing it off as fantasy. Such stories are fine as fun wish fulfillment, but as fantasy? Sometimes I see the taming and muting and clichizing, and if that's not a word, it is now, of fantasy as an attempt to tame that strangeness, that peril, that beauty. I'm not even talking here about the fears that parents sometimes have that fantasy will make their children satanic or schizophrenic. That's a different topic. But some budding fantasy writers follow the well-worn track, I think, not only because others are doing it and thus they think this is the way it should be done, but because they have seen what fantasy can do in Tolkien and Dunsany and Martin and Hobb and many others, and they're frightened that someone might ask them to do that. Robin Hobb in Meditations on Middle-earth says that Tolkien set a bar for her by writing The Lord of the Rings. She doesn't believe she'll ever surmount it, but she keeps trying. Maybe these fantasy writers don't want to try. Following the path of the princess keeps them safe. If they went off it, they might jump and fail, and they aren't ready to deal with that yet. Somewhat aside from my main point, but I wanted to include it. Things are so simple in some fantasies, and this endures in the published ones as well as in the ones on fp.net. This is black and this is white. This is dark and this is light. Evil, ugly, orc, wrong. Uncomplicated. Good is beautiful, elf, right, and also uncomplicated. There is no beautiful evil, no perilous shea, no hero who does not triumph. But there are some older stories where that's so, even some modern fantasies where that is so. The Lord of the Rings doesn't allow unmitigated triumph. It concludes with sorrow and great joy, both all tangled and mixed together. Even The Hobbit somewhat ends that way. Certainly not all the characters survive the way a reader might expect them to. And some writers like Kay and Martin achieve that, so that even the characters you scorn are perfectly understandable and can fall in dark glory. I've heard people argue that fantasy's place is to be morally clearer and sharper than our own world. I think that's a falsehood. Our own world, though we know on one level of our minds that it's complicated, gets simplified into us and them, black and white, wrong and right. I think that fantasy's place could also legitimately be to explore complexity and nuance of character and morality, and to do it so beautifully that the reader has no choice but to think about it. If something becomes ordinary in fantasy, or if the writer feels she has to draw very strongly on real life, say in the form of a teenage girl from our world with angst, which is real to her, then I think there are legitimate grounds for abandoning it. Making trees and streams, centaurs and dragons seem real to your reader is one thing. Arguing that fantasy has to take everything from the real world in order to be any good or cross over with it is just simply stupid. But do what Tolkien did. Cast yourself full-formed into another world, without apology, without having to take religions or customs from our own world and dump them in, without having to introduce people from Earth showing up and going through mechanical motions. I suppose it comes down to 5 words. Go out and make stuff. The Author Atlas project aims to bring all 424 of Limyaael's fantasy rants to audio format. If you enjoyed this video or would like to support this effort, please like and subscribe. This has been your narrator, James.